everybody, my name is Amy Shaw. I have silver hair, glasses, and I'm currently in a room with a green background and a grey sofa. Welcome to our webinar today on flexible working and shorter working hours. The captions are enabled for the session, so if you would like to use them, please just click the little CC caption emblem at the bottom of the screen and they should be enabled for you. We are recording this session, so we will be able to share it with those who can't attend today. Hi Stephen, welcome to the webinar. I'm just introducing everyone just now. I'll let you turn your camera off and then I'll bring you back in for the rest of the session. So we've been working around flexible working for a long time at BECTU Vision. BECTU Vision is the Scotland-based training arm of BECTU, the wider UK union. We provide support for freelancers working in film and TV in Scotland, and we work to make our workplaces safer, fairer and greener. One of the strands that we have is all about flexible working. This has come from a kind of personal passion of mine and my co-manager, Linda Fraser. Previously, I worked in the film and TV industry as a production manager and coordinator across both factual and scripted productions. And then when I had my children, I moved away from production and into training for film and TV. And that's where I came across this job as co-manager at BECTU Vision alongside Linda Fraser. When we first came into post, we job shared our role, which was really exciting for us. And as part of the job, we had to go out on sets and speak to crew to find out what the training needs were for the industry and what people wanted to learn more about and how to upskill and what shortages there were in crew departments. When we were out doing these set visits, quite often people would say to us, "It's amazing you're a job share, that's fantastic. I would love to be a job share. I would love to work flexibly, but it would just never happen in my department. It can never happen in film and TV, that would never work." And it was really, it kind of sparked a fire in us and a moment where we thought, well, why can't that work for crew and why can't that work in the TV industry? We should try and help make that happen as part of the work that we do. So in 2019, we launched Take Two, which is our job sharing initiative. We developed a blueprint to show people how to job share in film and TV. And we also offer support like coaching for new pairs and also support for productions who are employing a job share for the first time, to kind of encourage people to think about it and not see the barriers, but just see the possibilities and create opportunities to make it happen and therefore show that it can work for people. This has now expanded into flexible working. Post-pandemic, we realised that obviously people were working hybrid, things changed, people were working a little bit more flexibly to accommodate what was happening with COVID. And so we now work around all areas of flexibility, encouraging people to think about staggered starts, where they can crew up differently, how they can structure the department in a new way. In 2021, we connected with Timewise, the flexible working experts, because they worked in a very similar area. They were the experts in trying to bring flex to different industries. And so we've secured funding from Screen Scotland to do a report into how to really look at bringing flexible work into the industry. It was action research. We already knew what the issues were, we knew what the problems were, and we wanted to find solutions and present them to industry so that it can be a practical resource for them. That report's recently published and we're going to discuss the findings of it today, but we're also going to discuss what kind of came as a side to that report, which was about shorter working hours. During the report, we visited an awful lot of sets, we spoke to an awful lot of crew, and shorter working hours were always coming up in our conversations whenever we asked about flex. And so it felt like a kind of natural step forward to really investigate how we could make shorter working work in the industry and, you know, what we could do to try and move it forward from just having a conversation about shorter working hours, but actually looking at how to do that practically. And so we've secured funding from Screen Scotland, the film and TV charity, in collaboration with BBC Drama, to do another project looking at how we can make shorter working hours happen in the film and TV industry. So we'll be discussing flexible working initially, but then we'll look more about our shorter working plans for the year ahead as well. I'm delighted to be joined today on this webinar by two guests. I've got Emma Stewart, who's co-founder of Timewise, and Stephen Little, who's head of production at Screen Scotland. We have got our Q&A function open today, so I'm really keen to hear from people that are on the webinar watching. We're really keen to get your feedback on what you think works, what you think doesn't work, your thoughts on flexible working, your thoughts on shorter working hours, and also any questions that you've got for us about any of the work that we're doing at all. So please do use that Q&A to put in any questions and we'll answer them as we go, and we'll also do a little bit at the end. Sarah Mandel, our BECTU Vision coordinator, is on hand today doing the tech support behind the scenes, so she'll make sure that we can see all the questions coming through to us. So to kick us off, I'd like to invite on screen Stephen Little. Stephen, are you there?
Hi, Amy.
Hi, welcome to the webinar. Could you introduce yourself and also just give a little visual description of yourself for viewers who are blind, please?
Of course. So my name is Stephen Little. I'm head of production at Screen Scotland. I also lead on our skills and training strategy. Today, I'm a white male with short brown hair, and I'm wearing a purple jumper as well. I I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank BECTU Vision Timewise for bringing this opportunity to us. It's something that we are passionate about, is trying to change the way the industry works. And there's such a huge emphasis on training and skills development at the moment, post-pandemic, and it's we've never seen the industry more engaged. You know, we're talking to all the streamers and studios who all want to do more training initiatives. But when we talk about training, we quite often talk about new entrants, and new entrants are super important to the industry. We need to keep bringing through new blood. Once we bring them through, we need to make sure we hold on to them, making sure that they have the right work-life balance. But we lose a lot of our experienced crew, and if we don't manage to retain our experienced crew, then we won't be able to train the next generation. And a huge part of that retention is to address the work-life balance and make sure that you can make normal life choices in this industry and still have a job to come back to. So that is one of the reasons that we were looking at all options. We appreciate every production is different. I don't think what the BECTU team and Timewise are saying is a one-size-fits-all approach. We're trying to build a toolbox. Short working hours might be one of those things that you can use in your production. We're not saying it would be suitable for every production. If you're filming in the middle of nowhere, then it's possibly more challenging, but not impossible. But there are other things you can do, and we've talked about job sharing as well. But there's a whole range of tools that you can do to make the production much more friendly to work in, and hopefully the further research will develop those tools.
Thanks, Stephen. And why do you think it's so kind of important? You kind of mentioned there that it's important to Screen Scotland and things like that to do that. Do you feel like Scotland's leading the way a little bit on kind of supporting? We've obviously found that you've supported the initial research that we did around flexible working, and then when it came to you with the plan for shorter working hours, again, you were really on board and very supportive of kind of securing funding to deliver that. Do you see Scotland as leading the way in kind of around these issues?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying. What we want to see is, Scotland has a much smaller population than other, parts of the UK, and therefore, when you find good people that want to work in the industry, it's competitive because there's other industries that they can go to. They can also leave Scotland to further their careers. So we're trying to make Scotland a really attractive place to work, and a part of the offering there is to hit that work-life balance. And if we can lead the way, and we've got really proactive producers up here and companies, and now we've got a number of studios, particularly across the central belt, then hopefully there is that kind of continuity throughout the year. We're not just having the peaks in the summers and the big dips in the winter that it was when Amy and I were certainly coming up through the ranks. Particularly challenging industry to be part of, but you're trying to give the crew the best training, the best work-life balance, and to work on the best shows. And if we can address all three of those things, then why wouldn't you want to come to Scotland and work?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephen. I know that you've got another call to go on to shortly, but thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're going to be here for a little while, so if anyone has any questions around Screen Scotland or the work that they're doing or the support that they're offering, please do pop them in the chat. Stephen will be with us for about the next 10 minutes or so, so I'll make sure to ask him any questions that do come through around that. But for now, Stephen, thank you so much for joining. It's been really great to hear you, and again, thank you for the support, because all the way through BECTU Vision's work around flexible working, it was initially funded through support from Screen Scotland, and every time we've come back to you for ask for more support for the new ideas that we have, you're always really, really on board with those and very supportive, so thank you very much. Emma Stewart is co-founder of Timewise. Morning, Emma, how are you?
Morning, I'm good, thank you.
Good. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. I know that you and I have obviously been in very close contact and working very closely together over the last 18 months or so on all the work that we've been doing. But I'm really keen to share with the audience today a little bit more about yourself and Timewise, and also if you'd be happy to kind of talk us through the initial report that we did about making flexible working work and how we did that research and what the kind of headline findings were from that. Would that be all right?
That's absolutely fine. Thanks very much for having me. So I'm Emma Stewart. I am co-founder of Timewise. I'm a white woman wearing glasses with very badly dyed orange hair and a very messy office background. And by way of introduction, so Timewise has been around for about 17 years, and we are a social business, and we set up originally as Women Like Us to help women get back to work post-children, and help them to work flexibly. And then about sort of 12 years ago, we pivoted to be Timewise because we realised that actually we didn't necessarily need to provide lots of coaching and support to women. What we needed to do is to change the way that businesses designed work and to create more better quality flexible jobs to enable both men and women to be able to work in that way. What we do now is, we're seen as the UK's leading experts on flexible working. We provide a range of research, thought leadership, and critically consultancy work to help businesses across all sorts of industries to get better at flexible working. And our clients range from Tesco to Google to the government of Jersey. We specialise in working in really complex sectors where flexible working doesn't just mean working from home, which is what lots of people think it does over the last couple of years. And we provide a whole range of job design solutions, both trying to tackle sort of operational barriers to changing how people work, and also cultural barriers to changing the way leaders think about people working differently. We also run our own job site. We have about 90,000 people on our books, so we understand the candidate perspective. And I guess, yes, for the last year, we've been working with Amy, BECTU Vision, and also with Screen Scotland, and most recently undertaking this piece of research. My personal driver for this was that the reason I set up Women Like Us and then Timewise originally was I used to work as a television producer in documentaries, and sadly couldn't make it work with kids, had my children, and then left the industry because I just realised it wasn't flexible enough for me. So this has been a long time coming, this project for me. So I'm completely thrilled. We're sort of looking at how to see if we can try and improve flexible work. What I would say is we recognise that whilst we work in lots of different industries, there has been a whole army of people championing, campaigning for and lobbying for flexible work in film and television, obviously BECTU Vision, but others as well. So I guess what we wanted to do in collaborating on this piece of research was to really try and focus in on, we all know the challenges, but focus in on what the solutions could look like, and to bring some of our job design knowledge into that with a view to trying to put some really practical recommendations out there. And obviously we're really thrilled to be doing this next piece of work as well. So in terms of the methodology for the research, essentially, we wanted to do two things. The first was, the exam question was, to what extent would improving working patterns and working hours enable the people that work in this industry, yourselves, to be able to improve your health, your well-being, to be able to make sure that you are able to have a sustainable work-life balance, and to make sure that you stay in the industry that you have trained long and hard to work in. The driver for production companies is to obviously be able to think about whether actually improving flexible working is a way to keep people and a way to attract more talent in, because we recognise that the wider context is clearly productions have really picked up, but we also recognise that production companies really struggle to get good people. They really struggle also with diversity, because obviously the working patterns in the industry do preclude people with caring responsibilities, people with disabilities, and often older workers as well from being able to carry on in the industry. So that's the sort of context behind it. What we wanted to do, as I said, was to try and understand specifically where are the pockets of good practice around flexible working, and then what are the constraints that stop those from being scaled out to become more mainstream in the industry. And we took two approaches. The first, we did a literature review, mini literature review, to see what had been analysed before and to try and understand where there are examples of good practice. And then secondly, and this was, I think, where we learned a huge amount, we spoke to 4 productions that are filming in Scotland, or were sort of while we were doing the research. And we spoke specifically to the production teams and the crew, and these were productions that range from teams of 70 to sort of around about 400 people, location studio based, broadcast and streamer commissioned, one-off dramas through to long-running shows. And we really wanted to get under the skin of crew's experience, but also production leads experience as well as talking to some wider industry experts. And as I said, what we wanted to learn was what works and how can you scale it. In terms of, I guess, headline sort of findings, there's quite a lot in the report. Hopefully you have a chance to read it, but I just thought I'd break it down into sort of 4 kind of areas. So firstly, what was really interesting was to understand from a crew's perspective what flexible working means. You know, what are people's preferences? If you're working on a drama, a scripted drama, what is it that you need? And just for context, it's important because in every single industry we operate in, flexible working means different things to different people. So if you talk to nurses in the NHS, actually flexible working is a dirty word. They want predictable working. They want to know when they're working, how many weeks in advance, because it's weekends on, off. It's actually more about fixed working patterns, so you can have predictable time off. If you talk about financial services, very similar in terms of long hours. Often what flexible working means is being able to work less, being able to work part-time, being able to work job share, as Amy said. On productions, I mean, the crew that we spoke to, and we need to caveat this, obviously, these were a number of crew, and there's lots of more people we want to speak to, hence this second phase. But flex means different things to different people, but there was a recognition that actually the autonomy and control you often get in terms of advance notice, input into when you're working and the schedule you work was something that is a compromise, and it's not necessarily going to be possible in this industry. But what came through, as Amy said loud and clear, was the need to work less, and the long working hours particularly being a real constraint for people to be able to balance work and whatever else is happening in their lives. So that length of the day, particularly a sort of 11-hour plus day, is the thing that we repeatedly heard was the problem that people wanted addressing. Secondly, what works? So we wanted to, as I said, to really try and find out, we know all the problems making flexible working work. We wanted to see where it's working and how it's working. The good news is there are pockets of good practice. What we saw was a number of different things. Obviously, hybrid is now something that the industry does post-COVID. So, but we recognise also that working from home is only in people's gift, obviously in pre and post production, and only for certain types of crew. Interesting, what we found was if you're on a production with a larger department, so if you're in art department or costume, often there are more opportunities to access flexible working, in particular because you've got what we would call substitutability, which is if you've got a larger team, you've got more people doing a relatively similar function, it's possible to swap in and out. And that means job shares are possible. That means split shifts are possible. So it means also if you're working in blocks, you can split blocks on a production. So you're not necessarily having to do the whole production. We also found some really interesting examples of job splits, which is effectively a job share, but you're sort of turning on its head like this, which means so rather than splitting sideways, you have somebody in a more senior role, and then you have somebody in a more junior role who are effectively taking a function. We saw that in production, and particularly with some line producers, really interesting examples of using a job split to enable somebody in a junior production role to train up into line producer level, and a senior line producer who's probably getting to the end of their career to be able to gradually reduce the hours that they work. And for that to be a really interesting approach for training on productions as well. So not just necessarily to help with bringing people in and up, but also to enable people to gradually exit the industry but not leave altogether. And the other thing that we identified was very much, obviously, leadership matters. I mean, it's the same with any industry, but where we saw examples, whether it was job shares, job splits, split shifts, different ways of working, it was down to the head of production, or it was down to the production leads who had done it before, knew that it worked, and were open to being able to do it again on productions. So we found pockets, but there's not enough of them, as you know. So the third sort of thing I wanted to look at or talk about was, I guess, what are the constraints to enabling these pockets of good practice becoming more the norm? What are the things that are really holding the industry back? And again, I like working in threes. I'm going to give you three sort of three things to think about. The first, and it's the obvious one, is cost and budget. And there's something around sort of a conversation around trade-offs here. So we know that budgets are getting tighter and tighter, and they have been for a long time. We know there's a lot more competition for commissioning. And there's a real nervousness around the obvious question, which is, if you reduce the length of the working day, you have to extend the length of the production schedule, and that's going to cost more money. So there was a lot of sort of anxiety about this. We had, particularly with commissioners we spoke to and production leads. Really interestingly though, there's not been any robust analysis as to how much extra that would cost. And obviously cost is always a trade-off in terms of, if you are going to have to invest more, what's the return you'll get in terms of being able to get very experienced crew and keep them, etc. So there's an issue around cost. There's also a lot of assumptions that happen around crews' expectations of trade-offs. So there is often an assumption made, rightly or wrongly, that crew won't want to work less hours if that means there is a consideration around pay. Now, clearly, in terms of good terms and conditions, in terms of the BECTU agreement, we all know what we should, people should be paid for the hours that they should work. But if people wanted to opt to work less, is there a conversation to be had about what that means around pay? Many production leads and commissioners were just not necessarily saying that was something that crew would be open to, but when we spoke to crew, that was something that they wanted to at least have a discussion, put that out there, put it on the table, and have the option to consider that. Now, this isn't, as Stephen said, a one-size-fits-all, and within the mix, when we talk about crew, we recognise we've got a whole range of different demographics of people working in the industry. Young people coming in, young people working on location far away from home may not necessarily want or need to reduce the working day, but there are significant pockets, as we know, groups of people within the industry for whom this is a very live conversation, and they want to be able to have that out in the open in a very transparent way. So budget cost trade-off was the first thing. The second thing is just variables. So, and again, we see this in other industries. If you're trying to look at a production schedule where you're looking to flex people's time, whether it's the length of the time they work or whether it's substituting different people in different roles, there are variables within building that schedule that make this really complex. And it's not to say we can't do it, but it's a reason not to think about it. So actors availability, cast availability, huge issue, locations, weather, and this is something within film and television that is cited time after time, and it is something we need to face into. But as I said, it's not something that doesn't necessarily mean we can't preclude different ways of working, but it's just a factor. And then the third area, again, it's, I guess, something around industry-specific considerations as to why these pockets haven't been scaled, why we only see a few examples of flexible working, but we haven't seen it being the norm. There are a number of specific things about how productions are built. One of the things we identified was rushed, going too fast, too quickly around scripts. So actually being in a place where, going too fast, too quickly around production, scripts not being ready. So issues that actually we face when you've already got a schedule, but then you're waiting on a script to come in and people are having to wait to the very last minute, obviously exacerbates the problem of long hours because people are having to overcompensate for things being late and not being able to pre-plan in the best way possible. The other thing that we've seen with the industry right now is an issue around young entrants coming in and being trained up very quickly. Again, we've got a lack of experienced people. So the extent to which young people are moving up in the industry from runners to junior coordinators to coordinators, etc., can often drive inefficiencies in, again, what is already a tight schedule, because people are often being put in situations where they don't exactly know what they're doing. That is a tension. It's something the industry is aware of, but it is exacerbating the problem about trying to build efficiencies and work shorter hours. And then the biggest thing, I think, in terms of the industry kind of constraints is the nature of the way the industry operates. So you are largely freelance. You are moving around an industry where good practice is difficult to replicate. So in industries, where we have HR teams and we have people working in organizations for years, people test, they learn, they embed, they codify, and then that gets repeated. On productions, it will only happen if you're lucky enough to have somebody in a head of production role or a lead producer role who, as I said, has seen this work, knows it works, believes in it, is passionate about it, and will make it happen. So it's wrapped around people, it's not wrapped around the system. And that's something we really need to think about in terms of the recommendations that we put forward. So finally, just to the recommendations, and then I'll hand back to Amy. 3 areas that I think are complex but possible to look at, and really for us were a real priority. The first is this point about not codifying. We need to find ways to capture what works and to share that. So we need more examples of people working flexibly, and not just why, but how they work flexibly. And this is something, again, we see in lots of different industries, is those case studies need to get out there. Then, it's the responsibility of, we hope, industry bodies to do this, but also production companies themselves, if they have people working flexibly, shout about it, talk about it, share it, because we need to see that in order to convince people it's possible and to give people the confidence to be able to try and implement it. Secondly, building capabilities. So again, within industry bodies, within the commissioning framework, training budgets are really, really important. It's really, and this is something that we know BECTU Vision are already doing, but think about those training budgets in a really creative way. So it's not just about training people in technical skills to find new entrants into the industry, but how can we use training budgets to think about some of those things like job splits, where we're actually trying to leverage learning being passed on, retain people with good experience, and finding ways to be able to make sure that people are able to work less and pass knowledge on. And also thinking about people in a training function. How can we equip them with the knowledge, the skills, the capabilities to challenge production leads around job design and flexible working, and to support that to be initiated. And to often provide the budget, again, if we're talking job share, to make sure we have a proper handover time. And then finally, and again, probably the biggest, often most challenging one in any sector, is we need to face into the cost implications of this. So our third and final recommendation, which is the one we're delighted to be taking forward with, is that there is more need for more analysis on how much more it would cost to run a production on a shorter working week. To really also look at the latent demand for the shorter working week amongst crew, and to model that out in a way that gives us something to work with, a roadmap to say, okay, this is what it would cost, this is what it would look like, here are the considerations, and here are some ways that you might have to think about implementing it. So at what point in that commissioning cycle do we think about this? And presumably very, very early on, but a kind of blueprint for how to think about running a shorter working week production. So those are our 3 recommendations. I think we came away quite positive in the sense that there's a real understanding this is a problem. There is a real shared will to try and do something about it. But we also recognise that we can't have an informed conversation with commissioners, production companies and crew and industry bodies, and it is going to need all of that until we've got something really tangible to start to work with. And as I said, there's been some amazing work done already in the industry, but I think for us, we're really keen to now look at this piece of work to say, how can we take those pockets and turn them into more systemic, sustainable and scalable solutions. So I hope that was a helpful summary. The last thing I would say also is we're conscious this is going to take time. In the very short term, we have also produced a guide to heads of production and production leads, which is a bit of a checklist really, which is, if you want to do this, okay, what are the things you need to think about and in what order? So what's the business case? What are the kind of what are the questions you need to be asking your teams about how we could think about how much, where and when people are being a need to work on this production, to then start to bucket out, okay, what is and isn't possible in terms of offering flexibility? What do people want in terms of preferences? How do we capture that? What do we then do about it? How do we communicate it? And how do we make it happen? So very top line, because a lot of this work hasn't been done yet, but just something we hope will be useful as a resource, and it includes lots of other links to some really fantastic resources that are already out there in the industry. So it's a starter for 10, and it's something to work with now. And obviously we're really keen to do this next phase and to come back and share with you what we've learned. So I'll hand back to Amy. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. That's been brilliant, just to kind of get an overview of the work that we did initially. And as you said, we have got the guide for production teams now. Sarah's just popped it in the chat, so hopefully everyone can see the link to it, but it's also on the BECTU Vision page as well that you can link from. And that is just a document that allows production teams to, when they're crewing up at that very starting point, to kind of go, oh, could I bring any flexibility to this team? How could I make that work? So that's there. And just to kind of outline as well the other things that are kind of recommended in the report that we've taken forward and are trying to implement in the next year. So obviously we've already got the job sharing blueprint and we've got the initiative. The coaching's there. It's available for new job share pairs. It's also available for productions. It's available for anybody to come and have a conversation with me about how job sharing works, if they could do it, what their concerns are about it, and then moving forward, if there is a job share pair on a production, we can provide all the support with that. We have also secured funding from Screen Scotland to cover handover days as well, and we're working in partnership with Share My Telejob, who have funding from Screen Skills for also covering handover days for new job share pairs. So there's a lot of funding out there that will allow us to support people coming through that perhaps perceived as a barrier, that additional cost of having a handover sometimes can be off-putting for productions. We've now got an opportunity for new job share pairs to access a fund to help them support that and allow them to bring the conversation to productions and to their teams to say, we've already got funding in place to cover the handover day. We've already gone through some support with either myself or Share My Telejob about how to structure our working week. We know how it's going to work. All that's in place for new job sharers. And then we've also got the support for the productions as well. We will be looking into job splits as well, and how we can build a pool of people who want to be part of a job split, be that the experienced crew that are keen to do some training for people on productions, and kind of split the role to do that on-job training that so often is really difficult, particularly in those on-set roles. So we're hoping that we'll be able to utilise the training funds that Screen Scotland offers to productions and take a section of that to facilitate the job splits. So we'll be doing an awful lot of work around recruiting the pool of talent that would be interested in being part of that. We are creating case studies as well around flexible working and showing what's worked. We've got a couple in development at the moment, and we're also partnering with Share My Telejob on that as well, because they are creating a whole host of case studies through their work with the job share programme that they've got running at the moment. So we will have a lot of evidence of how those things work for lots of different departments. We're also going to be creating flexible working champions to kind of create that advocacy network that we've talked about already. So the flexible working champions will, we hope, have a representative from every department that will then be out on productions. So when their department is growing up, there's somebody that's got a knowledge and understanding of how flexible working works and how it can work in their department. And we'll train those people up as well to understand a little bit more about job design and how flexible working can work, and also understand what all the support is out there through our organisation and other ones to support flexible working. And in just a couple of weeks, we are having our very first playgroup for parents and carers in film and TV. We had an online playgroup during lockdown, which was an opportunity for people to stay connected and for kids to join the Zooms and blow bubbles and throw scarves and sing songs, even though it was mainly the parents that ended up doing that while the kids were off doing other things. But finally, we can bring that to real life. So we will be at the Kelvin Hall Soft Play doing regular playgroups there. And that's just a space for parents and carers who are working in film and TV to come together to chat about work, to chat about childcare, to chat about the issues, but also just to catch up with each other and feel a little bit supported. Because we know quite often in our industry, when you do have children and you step away for a little bit, it can be a challenge to navigate your way back in again, and you can often feel a little bit disconnected from what's happening in the industry. So we hope that that playgroup will allow people to stay connected with other parents and also the industry as well. So that's what we've got on offer for flexible working. That's what's going to be coming up over the next few months, and we're really excited to kind of continue the work that we've been doing over the last few years and do it in partnership with different organisations as well. So moving on to phase 2, as Emma's kind of mentioned, and Stephen as well, we did have findings from the report that were very much about shorter working hours and how to make that work. And the conversation's been around for a very long time, but we've never really had an opportunity to get that tangible evidence that Emma mentioned that we can then take to commissioners and take to production companies and start the conversation. So we have funding secured, as I mentioned, from Screen Scotland, from Film and TV Charity in collaboration with BBC Drama. And what we will be doing with that money is, initially we've been doing a lot of desk research. We've been trying to find evidence of where shortened working hours already exist and what productions have done it, other countries, other examples of where it may work, or how they structure their working days differently to the way that we do here in the UK. So that work's been ongoing. We're about to launch a survey, which is UK-wide for all the workforce who work in scripted productions, to try and identify exactly what crew want. Because quite often when we say shorter working hours, when we then dive into that a little bit more and say to people, well, do you want 8 hours plus lunch, or do you want a 4-day working week? Is a semi-continuous day important to you? How do you feel about the lunch hour? What are you looking for from your kind of structure of your week? There's a lot of kind of, people haven't necessarily thought about that, and we haven't got a clear picture yet of what the most kind of popular or themes are in that kind of area. So next week we'll be launching our survey across the UK, and we're encouraging as many scripted production practitioners to feed into that as possible, because we really want to get a really great oversight of exactly what people are looking for from their working day, but also understand a little bit more about those trade-offs, and if you're willing to drop your rate pro rata for the hours that you work, things like that. So that survey will be launching next week, and it will be open for 4 weeks. And we're going to take the information from that survey. We're also going to visit 2 productions that are filming in Scotland. Vigil 2 and Shetland 8 have just started their production filming, and we're going to be working with the crews on those productions to discuss shorter working hours. So we'll be visiting the sets, we'll be there speaking to all the departments to ask them what they think could work for them, what the challenges of shorter working hours may present to them, what they think could work, might not work, how different departments interact together, and kind of get a really big picture of how that all works. And then from those crew visits and the survey intel that we have and all the insights that we have from other countries, and potentially we've seen little pockets of productions that have done shorter working hours in different forms, we're going to take all that information, and then retrospectively we're going to look at the budgets and schedules for both Shetland and Vigil and create shorter working hours versions of those, taking all the intel that we've got and feed that in. At the end of those productions, we'll have a kind of tangible evidence of, if we had done those productions on a version of shorter working hours, what would the costs be? Would there be an increase in costs, or does it all balance out? And how much longer would it take to film those productions? Would it be 1 week? Would it be 2 weeks? Would it be a month? So we're really excited to kind of get that tangible evidence. And we've also been speaking to commissioners as well. So we've let the commissioners and broadcasters know about this work and what we're planning to do, so that we can get their insights just now. And once we have more evidence and we've done those shorter working hours budget schedules, we'll be taking them back to the commissioners again to get their input and their thoughts on how we can move this forward. If there is an increased cost, how do we fund that? If it's a longer schedule, if there's particular issues that are real sticking points, how can we address those early on in the commissioning process that might allow the shorter working hours production to then happen at some point in the future. So that's kind of an outline of what we're planning to do around shorter working hours. We've started the work already. We've already done the desk research, and we're starting to engage with the productions over the next few weeks. So we hope by the end of the summer we'll have a really good idea and be able to publish our findings later in the year. Emma, can I just bring you back in again? I've kind of outlined what our plan is, but why do you think it's such an important step leading on from the findings?
Well, I think it came through loud and clear from everyone we spoke to in our initial research that, as I said earlier, of all the ways to think about sort of, flexible working, what does flexible working really mean for people? We can look at it in different ways, and actually the length of the working day was just the area that people repeatedly told us was a real challenge. And I think, so I think for us it's really important because, as you said, we need to dig into, okay, well, what length of working day? And we need to build a roadmap for how you could, in theory, do that. And I guess just because things are really complicated doesn't mean to say you shouldn't try it. But we're really aware that, and it's kind of why we do what we do at Timewise, that there are lots of industries that recognise the problems they're facing and recognise, it's really, really challenging to do this stuff. I mean, all the commissioners we spoke to said it's going to cost us more money. We're already having to pay more because we recognise that we've got the BECTU agreement in place. we're being squeezed. Everybody had, you know, everybody shares the problem, but the difficulty is very few people have the capacity to try and think about the solutions. And as I said, there's a lot of learning. We've seen some really innovative things going on, and we've had some really interesting conversations. You know, we spoke to a line producer recently who said, I've been doing a sort of version of this on productions that I've worked on for the last few years, but we've just sort of done it, but no one's actually captured that, and no one's written down what does it look like. So I think it's really important to try and model it out properly. I think it's really important, not just for crew, because it's clearly something that people are asking for, and obviously being paid properly because of the agreement matters, but how people work really matters. And if we want a diverse workforce, then we've got to be able to look at this, I think. And it's been an issue that we know the industry's faced for years. As I said, you know, 20 years ago, it was the reason I dropped out, having spent my previous 10 years trying to get to the point I got to in my career, and then I had to completely career switch. So the industry's got a problem in that it invests a huge amount of time and effort and money in onboarding people and training people. And, you know, the skills agenda is really significant if you talk to industry bodies. But, you know, so is the way we design work, because we don't necessarily struggle to bring people into industries because they've got a lack of skills. I mean, obviously you have to train them in the specific technical abilities, but we often struggle to bring people into industries because of the way the work is designed, because of the working conditions and the working patterns, and then we lose them because of that at certain points in their careers. So I think it's going to be really, you know, it's really critical in the context of having the talent we need to produce really good work to do this. So it's a creative industry. We need to have creative job design solutions as well as make creative productions. And I guess what I'd also say is, you know, we found in other industries we've worked in similar problems, almost they feel insurmountable. We worked in the construction sector for a number of years, and we did some really big pilots working with big production companies. So sounds very different, but actually very, very kind of transferable issues, which is you've got a project, maybe it'll take 6 months as opposed to 6 weeks. You've got a team of people working on that project, building a tunnel or a car park or a building. You've got incredibly long working hours. You've got people being paid on day rates or hourly rates or weekly rates. And you've got a culture around presenteeism. You know, we are all in this for the long haul, and everything else has to be part while we're working on it. But we were able to make changes there. You know, we spoke to mainly men on sets, but also some women on sites, I should say. And, you know, they all wanted to work a bit less. And actually, what worked in those projects was having these open conversations, was capturing preferences, and then was making sure that we trained up the equivalent of kind of heads of production, you know, and their site managers to just try and implement some different working patterns. It was staggered start and finish times. Sometimes it was output-based work, which is if we get everything done, if you got the bit of the bill done on that day, could go home. If you get everything in the can, let's go home. So there's equivocals here about testing different ways. And then really critically, we did some survey work to try and look at both what was the impact on crew and also on the productions. None of those, I keep saying productions, none of those projects went over on time or budget. And everybody who worked on those projects, their work-life balance scores doubled from the start of the projects to the end of the projects. So for me, that was really telling. We weren't trying to kind of do things faster or better or more efficient or save money. We just wanted to run with what we had, but give the people working on those projects a bit of a happier, healthy day. And we were able to achieve that, you know, and that's now being rolled out. And we've got a whole range of production construction companies who are modeling some of the practices that we advocated. But before that, that was an industry that was like, no, we just do long hours. We'll run some women into construction courses, but apart from that, we're not really going to look at flexible working. And it's really shifting now. So it's possible, but I think you just got to build a roadmap, give the examples, and try and sort of articulate the steps that need to be taken, and then critically make it a shared solution, not just a shared problem.
I think that's so interesting, and I think when you and I first spoke in our very first conversation around that, we talked so much about your work in the construction industry, and it just rang so many bells for me, because it is very similar in the way that people are moving from job to job, and it's very location based, and there's all those sort of similar challenges. So I think it's really interesting to kind of draw parallels, and I think it's inspiring having read the reports and the findings and watched the videos about all the people in the construction industries that you've made, sort of showing how it's changed their lives. I think it just really inspires me as to how we can make that happen in our industry as well, because of those parallels. It's just brilliant. I'm seeing a few questions come in on the Q&A, so I'm just going to run through some of those for us, Emma, as well. Will there be a partner report focusing on unscripted productions in Scotland? We have discussed this because it's such a large issue. We wanted to focus firstly on scripted productions, and through the nature of the funding that we had as well, the focus is on scripted initially, but what we're hoping is that the findings, some will be transferable to unscripted, and if we need to do more work and do a kind of deeper dive into the unscripted side of things, because there's some transferable things that just don't mix and match, we will absolutely seek funding to try and do that. Someone else is saying it's very interesting to hear about, it'd be very interesting to hear from how the sector operates in other countries, and also where we can learn from other sectors, well, as we mentioned about the construction industry there. And yeah, it's been interesting to kind of start that desk research into other countries to see how they work, particularly the Scandinavian countries, who have a slightly different way of working in general across all their sectors. It's been really interesting to see what they do, not just around shorter working hours, which they do work, but also around how they structure their productions and the kind of things that they have in place. For example, in Sweden, they when they schedule their production, they lock their schedule 2 weeks before they start filming, and then if there's any amendments to that schedule, there's fines and consequences financially for making any changes to the schedule. So it allows a decent amount of time for the crew that are working on that production to get prepped and ready for the first day filming with a locked schedule and locked scripts, which I think is something that we could definitely learn in. Somebody's asking what's the buy-in from commissioners, funders, company leads. I think obviously we're really happy that the BBC are working in partnership with us on this production. They've been very supportive. BBC Drama have collaborated with us on this, and they've offered us the opportunity to work with Vigil and Shetland to kind of get access to those productions. As Stephen mentioned earlier on, Screen Scotland are fully supportive of trying to come up with solutions and ways to make our industry better, and I think that comes from Scottish Government. Obviously we're channeling public funds into the productions that we have, so it's really important that we work to the Fair Work framework that exists from Scottish Government and make sure that we're doing all that we can in our industry to work effectively within that. So I would say there's definitely buy-in from the funders that we have. I would say the commissioners are very invested, as Emma was saying. People are aware of the problem and they want to find solutions. But I think they're looking for solutions that are can be kind of presented. We've had a lot of conversations, but they really want to see the evidence, and they want to see exactly what we'd be talking about financially and with regards to schedule and that kind of side of things. So we've got a lot of engagement from people who are keen to read our findings and talk to us about them and figure out a way forward. But I think at the moment they're just interested to see what those findings are, so that they can figure out a way to navigate it amongst all the other challenges that we have around shrinking budgets and changes. Someone else has said there's an importance in normalising fairer working hours, flexible working opportunities for all, not only for mums, parents, and I say this as a parent, and the benefits for all. And I think that's a really, really important point. Obviously, we do a lot of initiatives around parents and carers with the playgroup and things like that, but we really identify that this is an opportunity for everybody. And I think that people have different needs and different wants. And as Emma was saying, and Emma, you might have found this in construction or other sectors as well, it's about retaining talent. One of the things that came from our report was that somebody said to us when we were out on a set one day, people don't retire from our industry, they just kind of disappear one day, and then all of a sudden you think, where is that person? What happens with them? And it's because there's no easy way to leave our industry. There's no way to kind of phase out at the end of your career. You're just either in or you're out. I don't know if that happens in other industries or in flex, for retaining and focuses.
It does, and it's a really good point. And I think the way we talk about flexible working has really changed over the last sort of couple of decades, and it needs to. One of the reasons we changed our name as Women Like Us to Timewise was because we recognised that actually, if you're only talking about 50% of the population, then you're not necessarily going to get the ear of business. Now, what I would say is one of the best ways to help women, and it still probably disproportionately affects women in response in the context of caring responsibilities, is to actually not make it women's issue. So to sort of decouple the conversation about flexible working from a gender conversation. We talk about it making it gender neutral, but I think the ambition is to actually take it one step further and to make it reason neutral. And some of the industries and the businesses that we've worked with, I guess, who are sort of more advanced in their approach, recognise that if they want to attract a good, diverse, brilliant team of people to work for them, and if they want to keep them, they need to be able to find ways to enable them to work in different patterns that suit them and enable them to do their best work. And we've got quite caught up on the whys and not the hows. And so that talks to the point I was making earlier about case studies, which is, you know, actually what managers and what heads of are crying out for is, I get this, and of course I'd love to do it, but tell me how to do it within the constraints I've got. So we need to do far more documenting of ways of doing this. And, you know, and it absolutely, the irony is a lot of the industries that really struggle to attract women are the industries that are not coincidentally the worst at flexible working. But, you know, if you talk to managers in those industries, they recognise that often long hours have real issues for men as well. I mean, we've worked in the haulage industry where we had an approach from somebody to say we want to get more women into haulage, and it's like, well, are the men happy? No, they're working crazy long hours in trucks, driving in difficult conditions, and they would really like to be able to work part-time. Well, let's try and fix some of the issues for the people we've got in our industry, and then we'll get more of a diverse workforce. But it's not just about gender, it's about age, it's about, you know, us recognising that people with disabilities often need to work differently. And we've got a really tight labour market, more than we've ever had before. We've got, you know, the government talk a lot about the participation crisis. There is, I think, a beginning of a sea change of people saying, okay, this isn't just a skills intervention. We can't look abroad often for our talent now because of the way things have changed. We have to think about the people we have in this country who are not working, and how do we bring them back or get them in and keep them in a way that is sustainable and healthy for them. And that will ultimately be good commercially for organisations, because you get the best out of people. And so it's I think we can't lose sight of the fact that women are often most impacted, but we shouldn't be talking about that. The way to get business leaders interested is to talk about it from a talent perspective.
Thanks, Emma. Someone else has just asked, will you be speaking with facility houses? Yes, we will. As part of our kind of research and everything that we're doing, we're taking into consideration the whole schedule and everything that is kind of feeds into productions. So obviously, if we extend the working week, or well, not if we extend the schedule as a result of shorter working hours, the additional costs for things like hires and all that kind of stuff will be factored in as well. And one final question that's coming in here is just about also looking not only at shorter working hours on a production, but the lead into the production as well, the prep time, what happens prior to production. Absolutely, I think that's something that we're really, really aware of. We realise that there's issues across the board and there's challenges, and I think we've kind of highlighted that a little bit already about the kind of prep time and things like that. So we'll be looking at the whole structure of the production and how it works. And although the shorter working hours is the issue, how have we ended up where we've ended up, and what constraints do we have that we're working with from the very start, from the point of commissioning, and being able to speak to the commissioners about that when we commission, how long we allow a production to prep for, what the kind of deadlines are around TX and things like that. And also we've had feedback from crew around scripts as well, and how the scripts, the delivery of scripts can impact on crews on the ground, and in turn quite often on hours when we then have to go over because we've not necessarily had enough time to prep, or there's been late minute script changes that have come in that nobody's had time to be allowed to kind of implement. So we're aware of that side of things as well, and that's definitely something that we'll be looking into and not necessarily addressing, but covering when we're doing our research, to look at that kind of whole pipeline and how it affects the decisions that are made at the point of commissioning, and then all the way through early prep, pre-prep, then affect the production and the working hours that we're doing, and what's happening to the crew on the ground as a result of those decisions that are made very, very early on in the process. So that's something we're aware of and we'll be looking into as well. Yes, so Emma, thank you so much. It's been so nice. I know that you and I chat about flexible working pretty much on a daily basis, but it's lovely to be able to chat to a wider audience about the work that we've been doing and what we've got coming up and what engagement is out there, and kind of we're keen to use this as an opportunity to share what we're doing, but also to encourage people to think about what their roles are in this and how they can help feed into the work that we're doing and how they can help change the productions that are happening not only in Scotland but across the UK. So a massive thank you, Emma, for joining us today and sharing all of that. I'll say a thank you to Stephen. I know he's not here anymore, but I know that it was really great to have him on a call earlier on as well. And I'd also like to say a thank you to our BECTU Vision funders, who are Screen Scotland, BBC, Scottish Union Learning, in partnership with BECTU, who allow BECTU Vision to do all the work that we do across the year on all our different strands, including flexible working. If you'd like any more information on anything that we're doing, you can get us on the BECTU Vision website, and you can email us vision@bectu.org.uk, and hopefully I will be seeing you on our set visits very soon. So have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again to Emma and Stephen, and to behind the scenes and our captioners who have been providing the captions today. I hope to see you soon. Bye.